Gaming is an industry that's not short on controversy. There's always an argument going on about microtransactions, loot boxes, or a social issue. But what about releasing unfinished games? If anything, that's an unfinished controversy on all our parts. And it seems to be getting worse. It seems to even be the good ones. What in the world is going on? Hi folks, it's Falcon, and today on gameranx, why are more games being released in an unfinished state? 8 years ago, a telling comment was made by the Codemasters CEO Rod Cousins. He said, "The video games industry has to learn to operate in a different way. My answer is for publishers to actually sell unfinished games and to offer the customer multiple micropayments to buy elements of the full experience." Now, when people hear this, they're usually not happy about it. And how could you be? Nobody wants an unfinished game where the game gets finished through DLC that you pay for. That's not ideal. But there actually is some perspective here that is often lost. I'm not going to necessarily say that it's something that convinces me of this plan, but the thought was that the quote-unquote unfinished game should cost less than the $60 AAA Prime price. Then after the DLC, the game would cost somewhere around the normal $60 price point. So a lot of people take this as the inspiration for what has gone down since him, but I don't think he intended for this to happen. Obviously, we see games out there like No Man's Sky or Sonic Boom, which was a disaster. Or hell, just pick an Assassin's Creed. A lot of them really have been patched into quote-unquote goodness. But the form of unfinished game that we see is nothing like what the Codemasters CEO said. It's the full game, it's just not in what we would call finished condition. Why? Well, let's take a little bit of perspective from actual developers. I'm not saying publishers and I'm not saying business people, I am saying developers. Developers are often working on timelines that are not created by themselves. They're actually created by either bosses, executives, shareholders, or most likely just somebody who runs a publisher that has a contract with them to make a game. More often than not, these dates and times have specific reasons. They correspond with a release schedule that the publisher believes would be the highest impact, the highest sales potential. Now, a developer gets all of this information and says, what can we do? Can we get the game done in that period of time? And do we have to sacrifice anything? Remember, a game developer is usually somebody who has the artistry or technical know-how to make a game, but is more often than not working for someone else. Someone else is the one who imposes scheduling, usually. So developers make choices, and most of the time, well, let's just go ahead and say it's fine. We often have the big day one patches, which is evidence that the game had to be rushed to print before they were able to actually finish it, but it's not really the worst thing that's ever happened. But again, to bring up No Man's Sky, that was a game that frankly wasn't the thing that it turned into over the course of the year after release when it was released. There really is a big difference between, say, No Man's Sky and Witcher 3, a game that was patched quite a bit after release, but was of a certain quality and pretty much had all of the content that it was ever going to have, aside from all of the free DLC and the 2 story DLCs that essentially functioned as an expansion pack and, I would say, another full game. There were areas like the swamp that got specifically worked on a lot because they really ran like ass on console, but it wasn't so bad that anybody really felt they were being ripped off. An alternative viewpoint that one could pose is that Witcher 3 ultimately had much better content than No Man's Sky, and the fact it was incomplete was significantly more forgivable on account the content was just that much more likable. I would say it's comparing apples to oranges just a little bit on account they're totally different games. Even the complete No Man's Sky doesn't contain the type of detailed story that Witcher 3 does, and the nature of No Man's Sky makes it so that even the much better version that exists today oddly feels a bit empty, but still there's stuff to think about like reputation and overall reception and just generally how fun and immersive something is. Another thing to think about is a quote by George Lucas or Leonardo da Vinci, depending on who you talk to. Da Vinci said, "Art is never finished, only abandoned." George Lucas said, "A movie is never finished, only abandoned." But I think both are very applicable to a video game. A video game is never actually going to be totally finished. There's only a finite amount of time and resources that can go into any project at all, gaming or otherwise. So, in a lot of ways, the fact that a release schedule can be extended beyond release itself is kind of a double-edged sword. We do see more games that are released in a state that we, well, frankly, can't endorse, to put it in a diplomatic way. But we also see more games like The Witcher, where minor annoyances from development were resolved over time, as well as more content was added for free. Whether someone cares about a project or not, there is, of course, a business setup around it. This is an unavoidable reality. If doing something to fix a game prior to release costs money that it wouldn't cost to do later, the reality in the world we live in today is that you should do it later. Bottom line is a massive, important driver of almost any action, again with any project in any industry. Gaming, though different, is not exempt from this. Then there's the fact that an increasingly large number of games are online. It's just not possible to test at the scale that a game is going to be played at prior to the game being played. Sure, you can do beta tests, and sure, it often produces quite a bit of scale, but there are a lot of people who just aren't willing to play a beta version of a game. Even if it's free, it's ultimately playing a version of the game that intentionally isn't finished. The point is to help finish it. And well, for many, that feels like a noble purpose, and also you get to play a game early. It's never going to be the amount of people who play the final release. I mean, unless it becomes obvious that the beta is junk, the gameplay mechanics are bad ideas in the first place, and then sometimes you don't see the full release do very well, but more often than not, that's not really how it goes. I mean, there are some awful games that would have been a lot better, or at least decent, if they had been finished before release, and this is long before the patch was a possibility. If you can recall Sonic the Hedgehog in 2006, that's the game what killed a franchise. But it's not just bugs and performance issues, there's other things in games, like if you've ever played Final Fantasy Tactics, the original version, it pretty much doesn't have balance, and the translation is hilarious, to be frank. And then there's games like Fallout New Vegas, where there's a lot of problems, but the games are pretty damn good, and it's okay. I mean, you can still see all of the problems with Fallout New Vegas on display today. They have not been patched out of Fallout New Vegas, and there's no reason to ever think they will. And oh, it is full of them. But people tend to harp on them less, again, like with Witcher 3, because the game is itself just pretty darn good. But that circles us back around to a quote from Shigeru Miyamoto, a quote that ultimately shows the difference between an artist and a business person. Miyamoto said, "A delayed game is eventually good. A bad game is bad forever." This is, of course, a quote from a different time when patches weren't really a big thing, and because of patches, this is a line that's kind of blurred, but still, first impressions are forever. And honestly, if you can delay a game to make it a bit better, publishers, why not let your dev team do a little more? If people get a first impression that the game is bad and you work for a year to make the game good, you have to overcome a first impression, and that is not an easy task. So ultimately, there's a lot of different reasons why games are more and more released unfinished. Some of them could be avoided, some not. And let's just go ahead and say that building video games is not a cheap prospect. Independent developers with very ambitious titles can't spend 3 years not making money. This is why you have things like early access. Some developers just have to have this on account it provides a revenue stream during development. And it also provides a brand, early access, that tells the player the game is unfinished and allows them to understand and have proper expectations as to what they're playing. Obviously, this is a little bit different than the model of releasing a game, having it buyable in the store for $60 and still working on the game. But again, the release date can have a pretty big bearing on how well a game does. Christmas, obviously, is a better time to release an unfinished game that you patch in January rather than delay a game till January. There's no one reason why games are released in an unfinished state, but a lot of the reasons are a little bit more easy to, let's say, forgive than others. If this has provided some insight, or you are yourself perhaps a developer who has some, leave us a comment, let us know what you think, and if you enjoyed this video, please click like. If you're not subscribed now, it'd be a great time to do so. We upload brand new videos every day of the week, and the best way to see them first is, of course, a subscription. As always, we thank you very much for watching this video. I'm Falcon. You can follow me on Twitter at Falcon the Hero, and we'll see you next time right here on gameranx.